Hi, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful night. We're really happy to be here at this point in the project. We've had a lot of you are on the steering committee, so you've been working with us all year. The goal has been to give you guys a plan that's not just going to sit on a shelf. It's going to be something that Highland Park's going to be able to use to really plan for the future, a better bicycle and pedestrian network, a safer network, and something you'll be able to use to apply for money and get these things done as we go along. We're looking forward to rolling this out. How it's going to work tonight, we're going to have a short video explaining Complete Streets a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Then we're going to have about a 45-minute presentation with our experts, Deb and Charlie from WSP. And then we're going to be here till about 8 o'clock around the boards to answer any questions and comments anybody might have. So without further ado, here's Deb. Play the video.
Complete Streets is an approach to designing roads for everyone.
Drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users.
Now at the DOT, we know that we need the automobile, but there are times where the automobile just doesn't work or people want a different mode for transportation. And our robust Complete Streets program is making that happen here in New Jersey.
Our goal is to really integrate safely by teaching motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists how to coexist.
For decades, roadway design has focused on moving as many cars as quickly as possible. These incomplete streets have imposed costs in the form of reduced safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Incomplete streets have other costs. Many members of the community depend on a safe walking environment. In particular, non-drivers such as the young, the elderly, the disabled, and the economically disadvantaged. Everyone needs opportunities for regular physical activity to stay healthy and minimize medical costs. In addition to the safety, mobility, and health benefits, Complete Streets helps reduce personal transportation costs and manages auto-related congestion and pollution.
We made the pitch in the beginning for traffic calming purposes because we knew there was already data from other cities that bicycle lanes narrow the travel way for motor vehicles, and by doing that it reduces speeds of motor vehicles, and so it's a natural traffic calming device.
The success of Haven Avenue has led our city engineer and government to implement Complete Streets on any road that is being redeveloped.
Department of Transportation has completely changed the way we do business in the state of New Jersey. Complete Streets is a philosophy, it's a way of life. Our goal is to make New Jersey a sustainable, livable, walkable, rideable community.
Hi, I'm Debbie Hartman. I'm coming here from WSP. I have Charlie Rumnow with me. He and I worked on this plan, like Bill said, for about the past year or so. And we just want to go through a presentation with you tonight. It'll be about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll kind of have like a Q&A session. You can raise your hand, come up and ask us at the boards later, however you're most comfortable. So I just want to kind of give you a little bit of a background of how this plan developed and how it unfolded. We'll talk a little bit about the 4 E's and the different kind of recommendations that we have for Highland Park. And then we'll get into actual design recommendations, first for pedestrians and then for bicyclists. And then we'll have that open discussion. And I'll just tell you what the next steps for implementation will be for your borough. So we did a lot of outreach. We went to several community events. We had a study advisory committee that we've met with 3 times. So we had the outreach part of our study. We also did a lot of data collection. We kind of went out, walked the streets, mapped the sidewalk network. We did a survey, which hopefully maybe some of you took, to see what issues the community believes are out there. And then we took all that information back and went back and came up with some concepts to present to you tonight. And we're at this blue line that you see right there. And after tonight, if we have any recommendations from this group, that will get folded into the final report and the implementation matrix that will then be handed off to Highland Park to unroll as it allows. So this is a summary of the outreach that we did. We started off with a public event out in, it was Main Street, I believe. And then we had a couple of stakeholder advisory committee meetings. That's what you see with the SAC. We had a day at the farmers market. We had several focus groups with business owners and other institutional groups within the borough. We went out to Arts in the Park. And then here we are tonight at a public meeting so that we can present it to everyone. Our first SAC meeting, we talked about what the goals would be, what Highland Park wanted to see for itself, and 4 big issues kind of bubbled to the top. Safety was a concern. The borough wants to encourage walking and bicycling wherever possible. Connectivity is important. You have a really good network already, so we want to be able to walk and bike across that network. And then how do you guys move forward? How do you implement this plan? So with our data analysis, we had some key takeaways. We kind of did a hotspot analysis of where crashes tend to congregate. Most of them occurred, which I'm sure you all agree and know, on Raritan Avenue and River Road. But you have a lot of strengths that you can build on in Highland Park. There is a really good, strong demand for walking and biking. There is a lot of employment that can be walk and bike to, a lot of retail, food establishments, so you have the dense network that's ideal to walk and bike to all these places. A lot of your side streets are very low traffic. There's a nice neighborhood, slow feel to them. So then we also looked for opportunities of where can we enhance the network that you already have out there to encourage this complete streets idea so people that are on their bike or walking feel safe and comfortable. So just going to walk you through real quickly. We tried to do kind of a 4-pronged implementation approach of what we call the 4 E's. The first is education. We also look to have encouragement, enforcement, and engineering. So Highland Park already has a lot of strong educational efforts that are ongoing. You have the Keep Middlesex Moving annual bike rodeo and pedestrian safety presentation. And I believe you guys do a bike rodeo every year. I believe that is the case. You passed your own complete streets policy, so now is the time to kind of use that momentum and move this forward. Some of the other educational efforts that we see make a big impact are distribution of information, safe walking and bicycling tips. We have the Complete Streets handout here tonight. Rules of the road, some of the health benefits of Complete Streets. A lot of the benefits are on that kind of wheel that you see. It's also in the Complete Streets pamphlet there. And then some training that can be implemented through either the League of American Bicyclists and then DOT does their own Complete Streets trainings. Existing encouragement efforts within Highland Park are numerous and strong. We would like to we have seen that you guys have gotten the sustainable silver level. You do walking buses for some of your schools. And you guys do a really, you have a strong effort in place already for encouragement. You've have a very good base to get this plan moving forward. But some other recommendations that can go above and beyond what Highland Park has already done is working on your bicycle parking. There has been some comments that we received during the public outreach process that there are some areas where bicycle parking would be appreciated. It gives bikers a landing spot when they take their bike somewhere. And then there have been other recommendations in our report that comes out later to highlight some of the success stories that you guys have had and to support the SWAC in their efforts as they go forward.
What's SWAC? Yes, what's SWAC?
Oh, I'm sorry. What is SWAC?
Safe Walking and Cycling Committee. Thank you.
As far as enforcement, it would be really encouraging to see some pedestrian safety enforcement programs. Those can be funded from the Division of Highway Traffic Safety. They do enforcement programs that Highland Park can apply for. And another very successful... What
Does that mean giving out more tickets in town? What does that mean?
No, usually a safety enforcement program is, an officer, a plainclothes officer will be a decoy, and then it's just an education. It's not a ticket. They pull over and say, hey, I was a pedestrian, you're supposed to stop for me. It's just an education tool. It's not that day. No, it's to explain what the law is, that you're supposed to stop for a pedestrian, crosswalk, things like that. Well, yeah, it's an education program for an enforcement issue, yeah. That day would not be an enforcement, but so that you know at any other time, if you don't stop for a pedestrian, that's, an infraction. So, yes.
So I drive to work an hour each way, and I see these signs that test the speed all the time. And there's only one town in my entire trajectory that actually has a policeman at the end of the road, around the curve from that sign. So one of my concerns is that consciousness raising doesn't work, because it's more like a game to a lot of drivers. That's just a thought.
Can we get through a little bit more of the presentation before we actually go into some questions? I appreciate comments, but we have a lot to get through.
Yes.
If you don't mind, then we will give ample time for questions at the end, if you don't mind. Thank you.
The important part of using some of these ITS signage to lower speeding is that it makes a big difference to a pedestrian whether they are hit at 20 miles per hour versus 40 miles per hour. At the lower speeds, at 20 miles per hour, 9.5 out of 10 pedestrians survive. But once you get up to 40 miles per hour, only 1.5 in 10 pedestrians survive a collision. So recent engineering efforts that have been underway in Highland Park. You guys have had some Safe Routes to School grants. You had the 2016 and you recently won the 2018. And you have been working on some of your striping at your intersections and improving some of your curb ramps. So there is good work that is already happening. We want to build on that with this plan. So the plan that what it's trying to do is improve the bicycle and pedestrian connections to your major destinations, your schools, your shops, your churches, your temples. So we're going to provide pedestrian improvements that not only cover sidewalk network and filling in some of those gaps. We looked at 5 priority intersections that give examples of improvements that can be made. We tried to pick those as a representative sample across Highland Park that can be translatable to other intersections. You can replicate them over and over as the need arises. And we also worked on a bicycle network to create some corridors so that you can get from one end of Highland Park to the other safely. And at the end you'll see a bicycle network map that shows all those connections. So the whole purpose is to develop a network of complete streets, one project at a time, for you guys to implement. And with that, Charlie's going to talk about the pedestrian improvements.
Okay, so I will start with looking at the existing sidewalk network. As you can see, all the green lines are where there are sidewalks on both sides of the street in Highland Park. And as you can see, most streets in the borough have sidewalks on both sides, more so toward the center of the borough along Madison Avenue. But there are definitely still some spots that are lacking sidewalks either on both sides or one side. So we're recommending to try to connect places where there are lacking sidewalks, particularly in pedestrian generating areas such as near schools, near retail areas, near religious institutions, parks, places where people are more likely to want to walk. And ideally in the long term, there'd be sidewalks on both sides of the street everywhere. There's some places where that would be difficult due to having not enough room on the street or having to encroach on someone's property or things like that. But over locations where we propose constructing new sidewalk are areas that would either connect destinations or are relatively easy to have a sidewalk there because of available space. And then now our 5 priority intersections. These intersections were decided upon by a study advisory committee in an earlier meeting. And the 5 intersections are meant to represent a wide swath of different kinds of intersections in Highland Park. So we'll be recommending things for a specific intersection, but it can also be implemented elsewhere within the borough. So first is Pedestrian Avenue and River Road. And before I show the recommendation, there's going to be bike recommendations on all these intersection slides, but we'll go into more detail. Debbie will go into more detail about specific bike corridors, but for now we're just going to focus on pedestrian improvements at these intersections. So Pedestrian River Road, it's a very wide intersection, has a lot of traffic, a lot of vehicles coming on and off of the Albany Street Bridge. So we recommend installing three curb extensions on the north side of the street. And these will shorten crossings for pedestrians, as well as kind of visually narrowing the intersection for motorists and making it not more difficult to turn, but more difficult to turn at high speeds, specifically making a right-hand turn from River Road onto Pedestrian Avenue towards New Brunswick. And we also recommend installing ADA compliant curb ramps and high visibility crosswalks to kind of make it easy for everyone who's walking along here and motorists to see that there are going to be pedestrians here and to slow down. And we also recommend installing standard bike lanes on the east side of the intersection of Pedestrian Avenue. And we'll later go into more detail as to what that means, standard bike lanes versus other kinds of bike lanes. Next is Pedestrian Avenue at Woodbridge Avenue, a similarly wide intersection, has 5 legs, has a lot of crashes, a lot of traffic. And for this intersection, because there are so many concerns around it, we recommend having the 3 phases of improvements, kind of based on the impact to traffic. So the first phase would have least impact. It is just 5 painted curb extensions. Most curb extensions are done in concrete and they're more expensive, take longer to construct, but these are relatively easily implementable. And they would shorten crossings and slow down vehicles, as well as provide pedestrians with a space to wait to cross the street. And then we also recommend with these curb extensions, we have to prohibit the turns, it's sort of like a U-turn, not really a U-turn, but left from Raritan onto Woodbridge and vice versa. We don't think there's that many vehicles doing that now, because there are alternate ways of getting to each spot. But with this, it'd be dangerous to do that, specifically for pedestrians who have to cross there and aren't expecting the vehicle to come from the opposite side. And then in phase 1, we also recommend closing at least one entrance each side of the Duke Oil Station, east of the intersection. And that would certainly need the consideration and input of the owners of the gas station. But right now, they have 3 entrances on each street, 3 in Raritan, 3 in Woodbridge, and more entrances, more driveways, with more conflict points. So it would benefit pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists to just have fewer conflict points there. No. Phase 2 would be basically the same thing as phase 1, but all the curb extensions in concrete. Would have the same benefits. It would be even more effective because it would be a physically raised curb rather than just flat paint on the ground. And it would also be a pedestrian refuge island on Woodbridge Avenue. That can't be done in paint because it can't just be a painted island in the middle of nowhere. It won't be very safe, but in concrete, it's safe and would give extra pedestrian space and would shorten the crossing so that people felt safer crossing each leg of the intersection.
So when you do that, you're losing a lane of traffic, right?
I think we're gonna wait for questions.
Where?
I think we're gonna
Okay,
wait.
okay.
Talk to us a little bit louder, please.
Sure, yeah. So phase 3 would be the final phase of this intersection. In addition to the curb extensions, we recommend installing separated bike lanes on Radisson Avenue. Separated just means that there is a buffer between bike lanes and motorists, and that there's a vertical separation, so like a bollard or something that prevents motorists from going into the bike lane. And that would be east of the intersection. West of the intersection, where there's currently one-lane traffic in each direction, we recommend installing a standard bike lane, which is just your typical green paint bike lane. We also recommend installing those standard bike lanes on Woodbridge Avenue, east of the intersection. And then installing a buffered bike lane on North 6th Avenue and a standard bike lane on South 6th Avenue. I know it looks very complicated. When we talk about the bike improvements, we'll get more detail as to what each of these things mean. And this is a very long-term concept. It would require a parking study, a traffic study, certainly not meant to be implemented tomorrow. There would be a lot of outreach necessary, a lot of things to consider. And then there are currently bus routes on Radisson Avenue and Woodbridge Avenue. And as part of this, there'd be a bike bus platform, which Debbie will show later, that will give people waiting for bus a safe place to wait, as well as allow cyclists to go through bus stop. Next is River Road at Wayside Road, and this intersection was chosen as a kind of a template for similar intersections that are all along River Road. So just north of here is the tunnel underneath the train tracks. And we've gotten a lot of feedback about that, about the difficulty of biking, walking, even driving underneath there. There's not enough space in the underpass to install sidewalks or bike lanes or anything like that. There's currently a no pedestrian sign or no pedestrian access sign that's kind of right below, right south of the underpass. So we recommend moving that to be much closer to the sidewalk here, to Wayside Road. Because currently it can be very easy to walk toward the tunnel, not know that you can't walk underneath it or that it's not a safe place to walk underneath, and then you kind of have to adapt once you get there. But if there was a no pedestrian sign closer there, it would give you the option of crossing the street or finding another way to your destination. And then we also recommend installing pedestrian refuge islands on the south side of River Road and on Wayside Road. And these are just concrete islands to give people a spot to wait. And then we recommend reducing the speed limit. It's currently 35 miles per hour. Recommend reducing that to 30 miles per hour to make it a little safer for pedestrians. There's a fair amount of speeding that coming out of the tunnel. You have to drive pretty slowly in it, but once motorists are out of it on the south side, speeds can get pretty high, which is dangerous for pedestrians who are crossing here. And then we also recommend constructing a multi-use path similar to the one that's already in Johnson Park, but kind of adding a spur to it here so that if you're a pedestrian walking up River Road and you can't go underneath the tunnel, you have a place to go to get around the tunnel. And then that would include some pedestrian scale lighting and emergency pole boxes within the park, which are things that we have heard concerns about. And then we also would be recommend installing RRFBs, which are rectangular rapid flashing beacons. I think so they're the beacons that flash whenever a pedestrian pushes the button and wants to cross. And at these locations, there can be installed such a thing as a It's called a Shabbat pedestrian crossing, which is motion activated on Shabbat for.
I don't think he's gonna do that either.
But the DOT has some devices that are not motion, that we use actually on Upper Raritan.
The next intersection is Raritan Avenue at Washington Avenue. And again, this was chosen because it's kind of very typical of all the intersections along Raritan, along this part of Raritan Avenue. We recommend installing a curb extension on Washington Avenue that kind of eases the turn from Washington to Raritan, because in the existing conditions, it can be easy for motorists to kind of to not be able to see oncoming traffic and kind of creep up into the crosswalk. So this will give a safer crossing for pedestrians and improve visibility for motorists. We recommend installing separate bike lanes on this part of Raritan, similar to what was recommended at Raritan Woodbridge, but we'll get more to that later. And this would, the bike lanes here would necessitate removing one traveling in each direction. It's currently 2 in each direction here. Again, that's a long-term recommendation. It need to be a traffic study. Volumes here seem significantly lower than along Central Raritan.
So the DOT is working on a road diet for that section of town.
Yeah. And then the final priority intersection is Bender Street at 4th Avenue, just a few blocks away from here. And here we recommend installing curb extensions on all the corners as a safety measure for pedestrians who are crossing. Installing a buffered bike lane on Bender Street. We also recommend a bike lane on Magnolia Street as kind of a paired bike lanes, which we'll get to later. And this would mean Bender Street and Magnolia Street each be one-way, like one-way traffic in complementary directions. And this treatment would improve safety of motorists and pedestrians, as currently motorists kind of weave in and out of the parking lane when they're going through the intersection. So this would kind of just create a straight, narrow movement. We have a few spot pedestrian improvements, which are just additional signs or specific locations with kind of unique circumstances. So things such as adding a steep slope sign with a steep slope, or planting trees in a location, things like that. And now Debbie will continue with the bike network.
Thank you. Okay, so right now I'm going to walk you through a series of photographs of the different types of bike lanes that are out there that can be implemented, so you can kind of see what the difference is. This first one is what Charlie talked about earlier, a separated bicycle lane, which means you have your bicycle lane and then you have a painted buffer, and the buffer also has a vertical separation. This is the most protected type of bicycle lane that can be on a road. The next, you go to a buffered bicycle lane where you have the bicycle lane and then a painted buffer. They're typically anywhere from 1.5 to 3 feet on the buffer width, and then the bike lane is usually about 5 feet. Then you have your standard bike lane, which is just right up next to the travel lane. It's about 5 feet wide, and it just will have, the bike markings in it as well. It can be painted green or not. Then you have what's called an advisory bicycle lane, and many of you may not have seen this before. We have recommended it in 1 or 2 places in Highland Park. Basically, it's a street that has 2-way traffic. However, the street's kind of narrow, but bicycles also want to be there too, but we can't really fit a bike lane. So we have these dashed lines where if a biker is in there, the car has to yield to the biker. If there's no biker there, the car can drive through that dashed area. And that way, if there's 2 vehicles, will fit. If there's no biker, if there's a biker there, one of them has to wait and then go around when there's an opening. Then we have a bicycle boulevard, and a bicycle boulevard, part of the definition of it has to be low speed. So they're marked as 20 miles an hour, and these are marked so low so that bicycles and vehicles can go in tandem. So they literally share the road. So they are usually slowed down by different traffic calming means. And these are some of the ways you can calm traffic on a bike boulevard. You can put a little roundabout at the intersections. You can have a chicane, which is kind of a horizontal offset, just kind of a little bend around in the road. You can use some curb extensions at the intersections to kind of narrow. All that visual narrowing enforces the driver reaction to slow down. Speed humps, speed tables, a raised crosswalk, which is like a speed table with a crosswalk in it, and then a speed cushion, which has the little track mark through it. Then the lowest protection is a shared bike lane marking, or sharrow, you may have heard that term, which is paint in a regular travel lane that just alerts vehicles that a bicyclist might show up. And then off-road, you can have shared use paths, and these are good for all types of users. People are very comfortable on these. There's no vehicular traffic nearby. When we drove around Highland Park, kind of took an inventory of how wide your streets are to see what types of bicycle facility of this list we just showed you we could fit on each of the roads. So there's some considerations we had to take into account, which is the travel lane minimum could be 10 feet wide for cars. A parking lane needs to be 8 feet wide if it's there. Bike lane minimum is 5 feet, and then that buffer between the travel lane and the bike lane, if there is one, the minimum is 1.5 feet. I mean, we wanted to make smart connections to schools, parks, employment centers, retail stores, some of the apartment complexes, the different neighborhoods. We also had to consider the traffic volume and the speeds that were out there. And as Charlie showed you, we did recommend lowering the speed in a few areas. And then based on all those inputs, we kind of give you the best option for each or most of your streets within Highland Park. And I want to say, based on existing conditions, except for the curb extensions, everything here is just, paint or maybe paint and bollards. It's within the right-of-way that's already there. We're not talking about widening anything. We're using what's out there and trying to fit all your users in the space that you have. So that should say existing bike network. It shouldn't say proposed. But all you guys have is the sharrow up Raritan Avenue, shared lane markings. So I'm going to kind of layer the different types that we're recommending so you can see where, before I do that, let's talk about bicycle level of stress, LTS, level of traffic stress. So there is a rating system out there that describes how comfortable a bicycle is on a vehicular roadway. So level of stress 1 is the lowest level of stress. This is for your kids, your seniors, your people that rarely bike. Everybody is comfortable on this type of road. And then as you step up through the levels of stress, it gets a little bit more complex to navigate, a little bit more difficult. Level of stress 2, it's maybe a couple more cars, a little higher speed, maybe a little narrower. And then you get up to 3 and 4, which are kind of like your 4s or your road warriors. They'll bike anywhere. They're not, they're used to it. But we try to do as many connections as we can at an LTS 1. So this is kind of what you have out there now. The beauty of your grid system is that your traffic is well dispersed. Your streets are mostly low speed limits. So you do have a lot of level of stress 1 already. We just want to make sure that everybody can get from one end of the road to the other on those green LTS ones. You can see though that Raritan Avenue is a big level stress 4, so it kind of just divides you guys right in half. So first we start with the highest protection, or the buffered or separated bike lanes. Like Charlie said, you can see that Magnolia and Benner, we have them set as a one-way pair, so they will have a bike lane in one direction and the other one will come down in the other direction. And then you have your standard lane. We've talked about putting that on Raritan, and I think that's first, and a couple other places throughout on Woodbridge. And then we have the advisory bike lane, which is on 2nd Avenue. And then we add some shared use paths. We're looking at connecting the parks along the waterfront and connecting to the East Coast Greenway that's already in place. And then some shared lane markings that while they don't offer necessarily additional protection, they do complete the roadway network of connections between better facilities so that people can make their way across the borough. And then we also wanted to, we have a couple of bike boulevards, that's that greenish yellowish color. And then we also put some outside Highland Park recommendations. It'd be great if you guys could connect to the Edison train station with some shared use paths up through to make that connection. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of these cross sections might look like. So first we'll start with Raritan Avenue. You can see in each of these cross sections there is a little directional arrow that tells you north, south, east, west which direction you're looking. Hopefully to help you orient yourself a little better, as well as in the corner it's kind of a place finder map so you know where you are. So here we're talking about Upper Raritan, where currently you have 2 lanes of travel in each direction. And like Charlie said, these are some long-term improvements that are going to require traffic study, parking study, but we are repurposing the existing pavement we have up there to just provide 2 11-foot travel lanes, which is what you already have out there. And then taking that outside,
because I cannot see.
Sure.
Thank you.
That outside area and adding a 6-foot bike lane and a buffer as well. So that'll be a nice protected travel area that people can feel really safe bicycling up.
Getting rid of a lane of traffic in
Correct.
each direction.
And replacing it with a separated bike lane.
Same number
And
of
how
lanes of
far
traffic,
would it
but
go?
they're moving from cars.
So it's, see the red line from where Woodbridge all the way to the edge of the borough.
Okay, I'll let him finish your presentation.
Yeah, but you're not taking lanes
All right.
away from traffic, you're
All
just
right.
changing one lane from car traffic to bicycle
Correct.
traffic. You're stuck.
Correct.
Same amount of lanes.
Okay, so Raritan Avenue, from 1st Avenue to 6th Avenue, right now you have a lane of travel in each direction and a lane of parking in each direction. We are talking about removing one side of parking to be able to provide a 5-foot bike lane on each side and narrowing up those travel lanes a little bit. Again, a bike study would be required that would, figure out where off-street parking might go, which side of the road makes more sense to remove the parking. So, yes, you have bus stops along Raritan Avenue, and there needs to be a safe way for pedestrians who need ADA compliance and bicyclists who might already be on the road to safely get on the bus, off the bus. So there have been some pilot studies. Here is an example of, I believe this one is in Colorado, there's also some in New York City, where this is an extended platform. So a pedestrian that's on the sidewalk, the bus pulls up in front of the platform, they have their one-level platform. They don't have an ADA issue. There's no ramp. The kneeling bus can go down, and they can get on. A bicyclist has a little ramp. They can just kind of come up, over, and down if there's no pedestrian in the way. And the bus just stops in the travel lane like normal. So then we have the westernmost section of Raritan Avenue, from Albany Street Bridge to South First. This is a little bit of different cross-section than anywhere else. You have 2 lanes in one direction, 1 lane in another direction, and then parking that sometimes uses a bus lane. So we are talking about, so there's Albany to Cedar, and then you have from Cedar to First. So these are the 2 existing cross-sections. We've kind of made them all the same in our proposed, which is just getting rid of that parking lane. It can have those bus platforms like we just saw, and you can then have the 5-foot bike lane in each direction. And again, the 2 travel lanes in the one direction towards the bridge will stay, and then the 1 travel lane in the opposite direction stays as well. So Benner, Volkert, and Magnolia Streets. Currently, they're very wide. They have 2 travel lanes and parking, so when the cars are there, it's not so wide. So we're talking about making them a one-way pair. So each one would keep their existing parking lane. They would have a 10-foot travel lane, and then they would have a 5-foot bike lane with that 3-foot painted buffer. And then bikes would go with traffic. They'd go one way on Benner and down the other way on Magnolia.
This would be all across the south side?
Yeah, so where you see the red line over there on the little placeholder map up
Oh,
here.
sorry, it's
Yep.
right in front of me, yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so Woodbridge Avenue currently is one travel lane in each direction and parking in each direction. Parking on Woodbridge Avenue, sometimes there's cars there, sometimes there's really not. I think it depends on where and when. But what we have proposed is leaving the parking on one side, using that existing parking lane that we're getting rid of and narrowing up the travel lanes a little bit, and then you can fit a bike lane in each direction. Cedar Lane, we have a rather wide road, four lanes. So we are talking about a center left turn lane to pull the left turning vehicles out of the way, and you can still allow the one level of traffic in each direction, and then a bike lane and a buffer in each direction as well. So South First Avenue, we have parking on both sides and a super wide 31-foot travel lane. So we're just going to use paint to narrow that up. Parking remains on both sides, but now you're able to add a 5-foot bike lane on each side. Cedar Avenue from Raritan to Benner Street and Maryland. Right now they are one-way, 16-foot wide lanes. So the parking stays, and then we just repaint that travel lane to be 10-foot wide, but then you can fit a 6-foot bike lane. North 2nd and South 2nd Avenues. Here's where we are prescribing the advisory lanes. So you have parking on each side, which seems well utilized in that area, so we didn't want to really take any of that away, but we have 16 feet for vehicles. So we are talking about just striping those advisory lanes. If cars are there, great, they can go. If a bike is there, they have to wait. Montgomery Street, another just a wide road that can be repainted to narrow the vehicular travel lane to include a bike lane and a buffer. North 8th Avenue has that little beautiful boulevard feel in the middle with the big grass median. And what we've done here is kind of use that green in the middle to put the bikes in the middle. So they have, you know, the safety of and you know, the beauty of the median on the one side, and they fit a bike lane and a buffer before the travel lane, and the parking remains as it is. North 6th Avenue, we're going to talk about two little sections, Raritan Avenue to Abbott Street, and then Abbott Street to South Park Avenue. Right now, part of that's one way and the other part is two-way with parking on each side. We're talking about just making the entire stretch one way. We can leave the parking on both sides. I think it eliminates a little bit of confusion, how it goes from 2 lanes to 1 lane, and then you have a bike lane and a buffer on one side. Then South 6th Avenue from Raritan to Magnolia Street. Currently, again, you just have a really wide travel lane, so we're talking about just restriping it to fit in a bike lane and a buffer. Okay, Walter Avenue is a little bit different. It's a very wide street. It's one way, so what we're proposing there is what's called a two-way cycle track, which means we just put both directions of bike lanes on one side of the road, and they get a vertical separation from the cars, and then that green area for the bikes is striped 2 ways for bikes to go in both directions. South 9th Avenue from Raritan Avenue to Woodbridge Avenue. Right now, again, it's a parking lane, but then a super wide travel lane that can just be restriped to accommodate both cars and bikes with a bike lane and a buffer. So Bike Boulevard improvements. This is where I said the speed limit gets dropped to 20 miles an hour, and you want to use some traffic calming devices to do that. But this is the list of the area, the streets. We didn't do a cross section for each one, but these 8 streets are where we have recommended implementing this. It's variable parking. Some of them have parking on one side, some of them have both sides, some have no side. So you would just conform this to whatever is existing there with that variable middle section that accommodates both bikes and vehicles equally. And then finally, shared lane markings is just that sharrow, the painting of the bicycle in the regular lane. We can't give them any dedicated space, but we want to alert the motorists that they might be out there. And this is the long list of roads that would be recommended for. Central, Wayside Lincoln, Harrison, 4th, 5th, South Park, Riverview, Mansfield, South 6th, Eamsa Street, Barnard, Skyview, and Valentine Street. So just like we had some spot pedestrian improvements, we have some spot bike improvements to recommend. Some of them on 27 are to add bike parking. We talked about that a little bit earlier. We also here have a recommendation for another rapid, or the rectangular rapid flashing beacon across Woodbridge Avenue to help bicyclists and pedestrians get to the other side. For speed limits, Charlie talked about reducing River Road from 35 to 30. We're also recommending the upper Raritan be reduced from 35 to 30 miles per hour as well. And then just adding some signage if you make those connections to the Edison train station so that people know how to get there. So just for reference, this is the existing level of traffic, level of bicycle level traffic stress you have. You have that big purple across Raritan Avenue, and then with the recommendations, you can see that everything on the eastern side of the borough has been improved to a green, with the exception of Raritan, and Woodbridge went from a 3 and a 4 to a level stress 2, which is a big improvement. Really the only place where we couldn't get a whole lot of benefit is on River Road, just because there isn't enough width to do anything other than lower the speed limit, and that's not enough to improve your LTS. But you should be able to get from pretty much one end of the road to the other on a green LTS 1 roadway. So what we want to do next is kind of open it up to discussion based on any comments we get tonight and the comments we've gotten so far throughout this whole process on the SAC. We've been working on a final report. Part of that report has a big implementation matrix where all these recommendations are kind of listed. And not only do we give, what the recommendation is, but who is the responsible party. If it's a short-term or a long-term improvement, as well as kind of a ballpark cost estimate for each of those, so that the township can make their decisions about where to invest their money as projects come up, and then, there's a plan for them to move forward and start implementing these things. So with that, we will open it up to questions. Sir?
Yeah, getting rid of one lane on Route 27 is a pretty radical move. So my question is, how many bicycle riders do you think will be using that stretch? And secondly, how do you ride with governments in your union?
Well, we did some focus groups, and we... I'm sorry? Oh, you want to repeat the question?
Second question.
He asked how many bicycles are using...
How many bicycle riders do you anticipate?
You anticipate using 27.
Dedicated lane. Mm-hmm. And how do you ride with governments in your union?
Well, I can't give you a hard and fast number for what we predict will be out there. However, we did get a lot of feedback that people want to be out there, and that people are riding on the sidewalks because they can't ride on the road. So the demand is already there, it's just not in the right spot. But I can't tell you that 50 people, or we don't have a number that we have calculated for that.
If I can add to that, we've been working with the DOT, not related to the bicycle study, on reducing the number of lanes on what we call Upper Raritan now for the last few years. So they came to us with a plan for doing that. There's going to be some temporary moves that already they started working on, but the long-term goal is to make that part of Highland Park also just 2 lanes. So
Car lanes.
2 car, yes, I know, yes,
From cars to
yes.
bicycles, the same number of lanes.
So they're reducing the number of car lanes to 2, 1 in each direction up there as well. Well, that's that study that they've already done, and they're doing some more on that. The reason, this all came about 3 or 4 years ago. A little boy was killed in the area, and they've been working on this now since then. So the DOT does these studies
But you didn't answer where the traffic's going to go when you remove a lane.
So I would refer that question to the DOT the next time that we talk to them. We'll be happy to get you an answer from them.
Yes. So I have 2 questions. So I take Volker every day to get to Route 1 and back. I like the idea of the one-way, but so one way I'd be able to go, what would be the alternative way to get to Woodbridge or off of Woodbridge?
Magnolia is the pair to come back.
Magnolia.
So you have to come up Woodbridge, I
know.
You have to come down Woodbridge, and then if you're trying to get off of Raritan, turn down, 8th or 7th and connect to Magnolia.
Okay, so, and then my other question,
What was your other question?
oh, sorry, my other question is, when we're looking at bike lanes, how come we wouldn't do the bike lane on the inside of the parked traffic versus the outside, because then there's kind of a physical barrier?
That is something that can be looked at. Right now, we've just kind of, and you're talking about some red doorings, is that kind of,
To have more of a barrier, I mean, the painted barrier is great, but even more of a barrier.
when they go to implement this, that is certainly, an option that they can use.
Yeah.
We do have to be careful on 27 about where the bus is, so that conflict might prevent it there, but other places it might be fine.
Still on.
Right.
Okay, so my parents live on the other side of Manhattan where they recently put some bike lanes in. So if anybody has to get out of the car on the passenger side, things become dangerous, especially if you have to get a wheelchair out or a stroller out. Because the bikers don't pay attention.
Could you use the mic, please? Liz, a little more to move it up closer, please.
Because the bikers often don't pay attention to what they're doing, so if they're coming around the corner, they're not noticing that you're trying to get out of the car until it's too late. So how would you reduce the risk of someone getting out of the passenger seat without getting hit by a bike?
You're talking about it,
Why don't we pass one around for the question, and if you can, hold it close. Deb.
Hello?
Yes, that would be,
So you're talking about if
You're a passenger.
you have the bike lane on the inside.
If you have the bike lane right by the
curb.
Right.
How do you let somebody out of the car?
Well, if the passenger should be able to get right on the sidewalk, now, are you talking about?
If it's bike lane.
Okay, so it is, the bike lane is on the inside.
Bike lane right by the curb is what I'm talking about.
And then the parking.
In other words, the bikes aren't yielding.
Well, that's an education and enforcement issue with the bikers as well as the motorists.
It's usually a buffer on those.
So the answer is really that you can't do anything about it.
You yield.
Other than some signage, I mean.
Okay, so that's the answer. You can't do anything about it. So for elderly people, handicapped people, and people with strollers, they take a bigger risk.
Well,
To get out of the car.
The car doors never open fully into the bike lane, there's always a buffer.
A car door doesn't go
There's
5 feet
space, so
usually,
you've got to stop and look for
There is
cyclists before you cross. It's
a
very
bike
wet.
lane is 5 feet, plus or minus a buffer if there is one.
I've been there, and I've been getting out of a car, and I've come very close to being hit by a bike. It's not something I can afford to happen to me.
if I can just say, I think there's a fair amount of education for every user of the roadways. We can sit here and we can criticize bicyclists, and we can sit here and we can criticize vehicle drivers. This is a very serious plan that's been very well thought out for just about every street in our borough. So I think what you're talking about is the same way a bicyclist doesn't want to get hit by a car door opening too. So we all have to look out for ourselves and each another and be a little more patient. I see cars flying down the street, and I see people crossing when they shouldn't be. So everybody's going to have to take a big step up in education and be a kinder neighbor in this big scheme of things. But the purpose of this is to really offer safer mobility to people other than just in cars. If we can do that, we're going to actually reduce the car traffic in town. And that's a huge plus, especially as we get more development in town. We're getting more development in terms of apartment complexes. Just the past 5 years that we've lived here, we've seen it happening. There's a couple more that's been in the works. And we also want to maintain a very vital downtown. And in order to bring more foot traffic, which is including more shopping, we want to be able to get people downtown in the safest possible way, no matter if they bike, walk, or in a car. So we're doing a parking study to complement this. We're reviewing our master plan, and this is going to be a component of that. So this is a big concept stuff that we're talking about. I appreciate all the different comments that we're going to hear about every intersection and every situation, but we're all going to have to work towards that goal to make the streets safer. So thank you.
I'm just curious, with the large number of lanes which were removed, which were parking lanes, you must have an idea already of how many parking spaces, without having to do a parking study. Just take the length of the street times the number of cars that normally park on that side. How many parking spaces have been displaced on Raritan Avenue, which will then have to go out into the neighborhood? And how many parking spaces have been displaced or eliminated overall from the neighborhood?
Well, we haven't done a parking study.
I know.
And we actually haven't really done a parking inventory.
Wow.
But what we did notice is that the parking that is out here, especially on Route 27, you have these buffer spaces that are really large. They are for safety, but they're larger than they need to be. So the thought is that as you sacrifice some on one side, you'll be able to squeeze some of those on the other side. Because right now, most towns, it's usually like a 3-foot section between buffers, and you guys have almost a full parking spot. So a great amount of them can just be replaced by restriping the parking you already have. And then a parking study will need to be done to figure out where more off-street parking is. And it might be that somebody has to walk a block to get, you don't always get to park right in front of the store or the restaurant you want to go to. I, today in the rain, ran a block and a half because there was no parking right in front of Unan Manor. So I went down to another street, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it is.
Debbie, one thing I want to add is when Highland Park came to the DOT, they were asking about a safer bicycle and pedestrian network. And the fact is, as you all know, living in Highland Park, the streets are only so wide, and you have a limited amount of space to work with. And it's just a matter of what the priorities in town are. The fact is that if you want these bike accommodations to make bicyclists safer, there will be some displacement of parking in some areas, that it won't be as convenient. It's a trade-off. Is bike safety worth, walking further to your car? That's only something you could answer. Different towns, it's different priorities. That's why, in the end, this plan goes to Highland Park, and it'll be up to you guys to decide, what gets implemented and what doesn't. But dealing with the steering committee, there seemed to be a commitment to, we want this town to be safer for bicyclists. This is a lot of people want to ride. There was the tragedy on Route 27 with the young boy, and people here don't want to see that again. So that's kind of where we're coming from with this whole thing. But in the end, yeah, there is a limited amount of space on the roads. If we were starting a town from scratch, you could have everything. But here, you are going to have to make some choices, and that's what the steering committee worked very hard on trying to come up with something that, strikes the balance. So that's kind of where this is all coming from.
Wanted to know if there was any consideration given to installing middle-of-the-block crosswalks to cross Route 27 to cut down on the people jaywalking in the middle of the block?
We kind of left the crossings where they are at the signalized intersection. It's kind of a high-volume road to introduce a mid-block crossing when lights are not that far away. I don't know that we specifically recommended a mid-block crossing anywhere on
The
27.
people cross in the middle of the block anyway without signals, so.
Well, hopefully, again, encouragement. That's one of the, we were talking about earlier, somebody asked about the pedestrian enforcement. I was talking about the Division of Highway Traffic Safety. The warnings go to pedestrians as well if they're jaywalking. They're supposed to be at a marked crosswalk. So, I mean, it's education on the pedestrian side as well.
I was glad that you mentioned connectivity as a priority, and the link to the Edison train station is great. Another thing, and this doesn't really fall within the borders of Highland Park, but the connection to the New Brunswick train station is really marred by the fact that you have to go under Route 18, and it is very disgusting there because of the pigeons that roost above the sidewalk. And it sounds, I mean, everybody laughs, but in fact, I moved to Highland Park with my husband partly because we could walk to the train station. And to have to walk through that, in some weathers it's worse than in others, and the same with plowing in the wintertime. It's something that should be somehow at least peripherally attached to this idea of making it more possible for people to use bicycles and walking.
Yeah, I think we have a full report behind this, so what you're getting is kind of a snippet tonight. But we do have some recommendations in the report for working with the towns around for some of these like spot suggestions or issues that people brought up. So.
I know this is Terry Hover, I'm the administrator, for those of you who don't know me. I wanted to mention that is not the first time I've heard that comment. And we have a very good relationship in New Brunswick, and Mayor Cahill's been very helpful when asked to kind of sweep up. But there are new folks in the Department of Transportation that have been very receptive. I don't know if we're going to have an immediate fix to the pigeon situation. However, there is some maintenance going on the bridge, which we hope will address some of the drainage, which in fact impacts our ability to shovel and de-ice in the winter. I don't know, they haven't sent us the exact plans, but believe me, this is definitely on our radar and we are working on it, whether or not it makes it into this presentation this evening.
Standard bike lanes, they're one way?
Correct, they are usually on each side of the road and they go one direction.
Yeah, so where we see those, and pretty much any type of lane you've defined here, where we see this in the network, we're talking two in that space.
Correct, one on each side of the
One
road.
on each side,
Except for
so-
Walter Avenue, which is a two-way cycle track, that they're both in that one side of the road.
Okay, and so since we don't know current usage, all of this is going to be subject to, does it make sense to extend this far? Is it really going to get used over here, that kind of thing?
That's up to the town to decide what to implement.
Yeah,
What we've provided is a plan and ideas going forward, and as either the demand or the money or whatever it is, the will, that's how things move forward.
Thank you for this plan. It's very comprehensive, and I really love so much of it, so thank you. I just wanted to mention something about education and enforcement. I would just encourage the town to both educate and enforce with tickets for pedestrians, for car traffickers, for bikers. And we do have to address racial profiling first, but then go to enforcement, including people taking left turns on at the instant that the light turns green, people walking in the street, and things that they shouldn't be doing.
We only really got room for one slide here, but there is a lot more information on the report on enforcement and education.
So I just want to mention a couple things. I've commuted from Trenton to Highland Park for the 25 years. Don't laugh, it's not funny. For the 25 years that I've lived in Highland Park, and I cannot tell you how many times every day that bridge is backed up. And when you switch Raritan Avenue to one lane, I don't even care if it's beginning at Woodbridge, it's only going to be one lane. Raritan Avenue is going to be a parking lot, and I'm never going to get across that bridge before Shabbos. It's just not going to happen. And the second thing that you talked about is eliminating parking, and I'm sure it's not part of your study, but I would think it would seriously impact the businesses we have on Main Street, on Raritan Avenue already, and all the empty storefronts we already have on Raritan Avenue, and we're just going to have more because if people can't park, they're not going to shop. They're going to go somewhere else that they can put their car. And I know you talked about people walking, and I walk a lot, but my husband has knee replacement. My husband's 77 years old, and he's not walking more than a couple blocks. So this plan is just going to make it impossible for him to shop or go to restaurants or anything downtown because premium parking is not going to be available.
So before any kind of road diet happens, like we said, a traffic study would need to be completed. So, we don't have that data, we haven't looked at the traffic, but that would be looked at before any traffic lanes are taken away. And again, a parking study as well, there would need to be an offset of parking available, so that would also be looked at in a parking study.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a fantastic plan. I support it. I very much like the conversion of lanes from cars to bicyclists. Couple of points. Maybe taking into consideration your concerns or your husband's concerns, handicapped marked or people with disability parking marked in mid-block in the residential zone would be helpful if people are going to have to park a little further away than before because of the conversions. In terms of enforcement, things are really not enforced well enough in this town. People don't stop at the stop lines in front of the crosswalks. They drive too fast. They make sort of shortcut left turns. If we're lowering the speed limits, that's not going to achieve anything unless we have enforcement. And your plan seems to focus on infrastructure, so maybe you're not dealing with enforcement, but simply a zero tolerance policy where the cops write tickets, not warnings, but tickets for the infractions I mentioned would go a long way. And that sort of gets to the point about the pedestrian operated signals. So there's a lot of debate about how Jewish observant people can use pedestrian operated signals on Shabbos. I don't see why we need them at all. A pedestrian standing next to a crosswalk is a red light to the car driver. And legally, no, I say legally, it's a red light to the car driver. And so we need cops who write tickets in that circumstance every time. Because a pedestrian-operated signal, they have them in New Brunswick, we have them on River Road right now. All they do for the non-observant pedestrian is slow you down, make you press a button that the cars don't pay attention to anyway, because there's no enforcement around it. So, and then finally, on the larger question, larger debate which seems to exist, nothing is cost-free, and so this is going to inconvenience some people, and it may inconvenience you, ma'am. I bicycle to New Brunswick every day and take my life into my hands, which is not a question of being late, it's a question of being alive or dead. So I think this is a very good set of trade-offs, to the extent that there is a trade-off between safety and speed. The other thing that could be mentioned about has to do with climate change. I think climate change is undeniable. Don't laugh. Climate change is undeniable.
I don't think she has any control over
to
that.
Everyone now, and favoring bicyclists and pedestrians over cars with the respect of converting lanes will help lower the carbon footprint of Highland Park and make our contribution for the livability of the next generation. So that's another positive to your plan.
Hey, first I just want to say thank you for the very detailed plan. I appreciate the level of thought and detail that's gone into all the different components of it. And I just want to reiterate, sorry, I don't know your name, the gentleman that said before that we didn't design towns around walking and biking for the better part of a century. We've designed around cars. And if you're worried about getting hit by a bike, you will be very unhappy to hear about the 2-ton things that everyone's flying around in that are a little bit more dangerous. And to the extent that we should get away from cars as the default mode of transportation, we should be doing that. This is a really good step towards doing that. So just, yes, this and more of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With education on both sides being absolutely something, I was curious about the platform boarding implementation for the cyclists to get on the buses. I'm curious, just as it's been done in other cities, has there been a challenge with sort of cyclists coming on the same time people are boarding on the buses, and sort of how that's worked?
Some of these are fairly new, so I haven't seen any like post-implementation studies on them, but you know, the way they've been written up in the newspaper, there's been no mention of any kind of confusion or any conflicts or anything like that. I mean, it's kind of like stepping into the bike lane. You kind of, if you're a pedestrian, you look for the biker, they're just going to be coming up a platform, and it's as a biker, you're looking forward to see if there's anything coming in your way. So we haven't heard anything about that.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's great that you're here and willing to listen to us, so we appreciate it. I live in what we call the Triangle area, and I cross over Raritan all the time. I'm one of those people that has to dodge around the traffic. There is currently a crosswalk, whatever you want to call it, by, I think, Washington. It does not work. I have to literally go into the street, hope I don't get hit. Cars do not stop. I don't think that they're going to stop even if there's a little flashing signal. I've been here a couple of times over the last several years. I was very close with the family that had the tragedy of the child that was killed a couple of years ago. We've been advocating for a traffic light. One of the things I have not seen at all in any of this plan is I just want to be able to cross the street with cars stopped. I don't want to have to hope that they're paying attention. And I know there's a cost for a traffic light. I just want to be able to cross the street with less of a concern that cars are not paying attention. Is there a pedestrian there? If they're not there, did they push the button? Did they not push the button? Is motion detected? Did it pick up the pedestrian? Did it not? There's also about, so that's one concern, you know. There's also about a mile stretch between the traffic light on 11th, I think it's South 11th, and Duclos, which is already outside of the borough. I think a mile or over a mile. So it's great that we might be enhancing the crosswalk at Washington, which is another concern I'll talk about in a second, but there's still that mile stretch. No one, you know, we could tell people go to the crosswalk, go to the light. No one's walking a mile or a half a mile out of their way to go back. It is a heavily crossable area. There's residential areas on both sides. For those like me, you know, religious, Orthodox Jews, whoever it is that might not be using cars, or you know, on the weekends, on Friday nights and Saturdays, that's going to put that. We're naturally going to be walking more on those days, and I do see all the time kids, adults crossing over Raritan in that area without any option at all, other than going walking a mile out of the way.
Well, one of the benefits of that long-term improvement to do the road diet from 4 travel lanes to 2 is that you're only crossing 2.
So absolutely, which means, so I appreciate that very much. I mean, there was an effort to lower the speed limit.
Right.
It didn't work. What they lowered at 5 miles an hour, it just means cars go faster. Doesn't work. Having it go from 4 to 2 is a great improvement, but I still have to dodge that traffic. It means that there's going to be more cars in that particular area crossing the higher volume in that one lane. I'm still concerned that I'm not going to have a safe place to cross the street. The area by Washington, I think somebody mentioned earlier, there's a concern I would ask for you to consider other options other than a motion detected or a button to actually press for those who religious observances would prevent them from using it. There's a synagogue over there. There's a rabbi of the synagogue. You can ask him what he prefers. I think before anything gets done, I would hate to see the effort get put in, money spent on something, and then it doesn't meet everybody's needs over there. So I would ask that that be considered as well. And finally, I'm sorry for taking up so much time. I also live on Amherst Street. There's a section of Amherst Street that has no sidewalks on either side, which is right off of Raritan. So again, I'm constantly, so for those, sometimes I don't have an option, but only to walk in the street. and it's right next to Raritan. And there are cars that are turning and you can't even see. So, there's a lot of concerns in that whole area from, that Raritan, I think they call it the northern, or the north, that whole where you're pointing, that area. There's a synagogue there, there's a high school, there's a nursery, there's no crossing guards, there's no ample places to cross the street over there. So please take, those concerns into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm Denise Nickel with the County Planning Office, and with me is Tony Gamblione, who's the supervising planner for the Transportation Division. And I just want to first comment to you briefly on doing an excellent job. We see a lot of this kind of work, and this is really top-notch stuff got going here. And just to commend the people who are out here tonight and the borough in general for continually trying to advance pedestrian, bicycle, and auto safety. I've been working on and off with the borough for maybe 15 or 20 years now, and they continually make progress in this regard. This is just one more step. We, through the county, have embarked on a new countywide master plan for the first time in a long time, and part of that effort was to do, it's going to be a year-long effort for public outreach that was started last fall, and there are a lot of different pieces to that. There are online surveys, small groups, large outreach events, all kinds of ways that community block boxes and libraries, you may have seen some of these things around Highland Park and elsewhere. And we're gradually getting the data in. I just got to do a call out to Trish Sanchez, who's helping us with that work through Poet at Rutgers. And so far, we're still getting the data in, but it's pretty consistent across, whether it's from Carteret in the north or Monroe in the south, that communities want more pedestrian facilities, more pedestrian safety, more bicycle facilities, more bicycle safety, more connectivity between various parts of their own community and with other communities and major destination points. And everyone's grappling with how do you do that? What are the trade-offs? How can you implement it? One thing I'd like to add and challenge people in the room to, because you're obviously all very interested, is that if you're doing infrastructure improvements, it is very expensive and it takes time. And to someone's point about the balance of resources for auto transportation, transit, and these kinds of improvements, the funding from the federal level and the state level is way out of whack, in my opinion. I think it's 1% to 3% goes for this kind of thing, and the rest for, not the rest, but a very large percentage for auto-based transportation. That's just a reflection of our past. And so anything you can do to have that kind of discussion with your elected representatives and try and shift that direction would help communities like Highland Park and elsewhere. It would be much easier to get the resources you need to do that. Right now, I think it's, $4 million a year across the state through some competitive grants, depending on the category.
Well, they just increased, they just added 2 grants, right? The bikeways and the other.
There's bikeways, there's PED, but in general.
There is a little bit more money.
Yeah, but it's.
That's what we're going after.
It's the whole. That's what we're going after. That's the whole, so in any given year, we track who gets awards. There are 4 awards for the whole state in a particular category. That's way under what's necessary. So anything you can do, talk to the mayor, talk to the council person, your assembly people, whoever. And anyway, just keep up the good work. Keep asking for what you want.
Can you also
keep
do
pushing.
a plug for how people can go to Destination 2040?
I can. I wasn't thinking. I brought a few cards that are out on the table to go online and take the survey. There'll be other events as well. I'm trying to think of the best way to get that information to people. I mean, there's a website you can go on to, Middlesex County, Destination 2040, and you'll find the survey on there and all the history of what we've done so far. It is pretty easy to find.
You can go to the borough website, and then on the upper right-hand corner is the Middlesex County website.
Oh, do you have a link?
You can link through that.
Oh, through the county.
Post on the Facebook event or Facebook?
The county does put.
It's on the county Facebook
Yeah,
page.
there's.
If you want us to post it, we'll do it.
We've been pushing it out periodically when there's a new event.
Probably went on a little too long.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment I want to say what Denise has said is that it's important to keep in mind that the improving bicycle travel as well as pedestrian facilities also has the advantage of expanding mobility to other modes and improving choices of the way you can get to places. You know, you look at the number of jobs that are within half a mile, even a mile, it's quite a bit. So it offers that possibility. So to the extent that we can better link that first mile, as we say, or last mile connection and going somewhere. Of course, Highland Park's right between the Edison station to the north and the New Brunswick station to the right, and even bus facilities for those that are in more of a residential area. So there are those opportunities, and it's important to keep that in mind.
Hi. You mentioned it with respect to, I think, one of the streets going into Raritan, the inability to see making a turn. I think that's problematic throughout Highland Park. And I don't know if you looked at some of the site triangles where really all over town cars tend to roll right into the crosswalk, right past the stop line, right into the crosswalk. I won't forgive it because, but I know they can't see. And I think it's particularly problematic on Woodbridge Avenue where you have the cut-through streets, people going on Volker to avoid Raritan, making that right turn onto Woodbridge, or South 8th onto Woodbridge, South 7th onto Woodbridge. I've been on Woodbridge Avenue going the other way, and people are looking left, trying to make a fast right turn, and it's pretty dangerous. I'll make that comment, and I also wonder why the gentleman with respect to Raritan and the lack of crosswalks, on that end, I think maybe to a lesser extent Woodbridge Avenue has the same issue, lack of crosswalks, and I'm wondering why that wasn't looked at.
So, to kind of both those points, obviously we can only look at a certain number of intersections, right? This study isn't bottomless. So we tried to take a representative sample that we made recommendations that can be translated to other problem areas as the township is aware of them, or as other improvements are going on. It's not meant to say that those are the only 5 locations where Highland Park should do something. It's, here's an idea, you can replicate it as you need at a similar intersection.
Yeah, to ascertain the effect of closing one lane each way on Route 27, I offer a very non-professional, amateurish proposal to your proposal. Why don't you propose to the town that, say, for 48 hours, together with the police and appropriate signage and notices ahead of time, that for 48 hours consecutively, one lane be closed in each direction on Route 27, and see what, as this lady forewarned, is going to happen. And plus, the cars will be idling, by the way, but why not do that? Why I'm proposing it.
I think Terry wants to say this. Because I had the privilege of sitting in on a couple meetings on, we're talking about Upper Raritan with the closing of the 2 lanes. And one of the recommendations, I don't know if we're going to do it, but was to, once the DOT gets a little further along in their studies and has a configuration, because you'd have to taper it, you wouldn't go from Duclos Lane to 2 lane, each 2 lane, that you have to kind of transition. So they're studying that transition, what would make the most sense. And one of their recommendations was at some point to cone it professionally, and start to try it out and test it a little bit. So we're not there yet because we don't know, it's not going to go from 4 lanes to 2 immediately upon entering into Highland Park. So we have to figure out how to taper it safely, appropriately, and the engineers, I guess, in different area of DOT are looking at that on our behalf, and there'll be more to come. So I don't think it's a crazy idea.
Excuse me? You don't think?
I don't think your idea of testing it is crazy. That's what we've been talking about.
That's faint praise to say it's not crazy.
You said it like it was kind of crazy.
No, but why can't the town do that? I mean, it's not the town has no authority.
Well, it's a state highway.
Oh.
So we have to have their permission.
They have to.
All highly regulated, and for our own safety.
So You said the 27 is a state highway, so the state has to agree to get rid of the lanes?
Yes.
Then?
They are doing a study independent of this one.
Just a quick question. I go from Highland Park into New Brunswick every day to work commute, and it's possible to do it, but the bridge, the Raritan Avenue Bridge is a real tough point because you can't really do it in the street because there's no room for you. If you go on the sidewalk on either side, you'll get splashed by cars when it's rainy. They don't clear the snow off it very often in the winter. So I don't know whether it's in your jurisdiction or not, but that's a real tough point.
It's New Brunswick's bridge, unfortunately, isn't that well, DOT's bridge, but New Brunswick's territory, but like I said earlier, and you may not have been here, we really are working, Mayor Cahill's been great, the DOT has been really great in the last, I would say, year and change when we've been kind of re-picking up all of these conversations because that connection to New Brunswick's critical for Highland Park. And so many of our residents commute into New Brunswick for Rutgers, for the train, what have you. And especially if we are going to see more population in Highland Park, we've got to figure out that connection. And we're committed to doing that.
All right, we got to wrap up, but what happens from here is we take the comments from tonight, roll it into the final report, and then the final report goes to Highland Park. And some of these things need further study. Some of these things you ultimately decide are great ideas. Some of these things you may decide are not so great ideas. But it's kind of a starting point to, more safety, better connectivity, and be in the town you want to be. So stay engaged. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussions as we go along here in Highland Park. And thank you for allowing us to come in and do our job. So thank you.
One more thing, Bill.
Sure.
If people have comments, where should we ask them to?
HP SWAC, HPSWACC@gmail. If you want to send me an email.
I have no computer.
You can drop off a letter to Joan. We'll get it. Lois, we've corresponded.
And I have my card with me. I actually went back to my desk to get so if for some reason you missed that, I can push the messages through as well, and happy to take calls.
I wasn't here for the beginning of the meeting. Is there will you be sharing the presentation or the draft report?
Oh, yeah.
For comment?
We will give Susie and Terry tonight's presentation for them to put on the website.
Just the presentation, not the draft report?
Well, we haven't finished it based on what feedback we get tonight, so.
Oh,
So
I thought we were reviewing.
yes.
I thought we were reviewing a draft report.
No, well, this is mostly what's in the report, but we don't do a final report until we hear from the public, so.
Oh,
This is
okay. I
your,
was confused about the meaning
your
of draft
opportunity
report.
to get your input in. It will ultimately, the report will be on the website too.
So there'll be a final report?
Thank you, everybody.